we'd like to spend some more time diving into our stewardship program because, as I was mentioning earlier, in so many ways, once we can serve a farm, that the work has just begun. And so tonight, I'm pleased to have two of my colleagues join me tonight and our experts on this topic to help guide our conversation. My colleague, Hillary Ayton, will get us kicked off in starting the conversation around the foundations and the strategy behind our stewardship work. Hillary, feel free to take it away. And I think we're just going to operate without slides, and we'll keep cranking here. Thanks for your flexibility.
Sorry to have you missing out on some lovely photos, but hopefully it'll be nice to just have an informal conversation as is. So again, I'm Hillary. Thank you, Melissa, for kicking it off. I'm Hillary. I'm the Conservation and Stewardship Director at the Trust, and really appreciate everyone being here and bearing with us, and appreciate everyone being interested in our stewardship work and hearing more about that and how that works at the Trust. If you have followed our work for some time, you've likely heard us speak a bit about our conservation work and the ways in which we build partnerships with tribal, local government, and local agricultural communities through that work. These partnerships are really designed to help ensure that our conservation work supports multiple needs in the face of a changing climate and integration of our conservation priorities at the landscape level. Similarly, these partnerships are also critical to the success of our stewardship work and our ability to achieve the best outcomes of our in farmland stewardship and in protecting the land or managing the land that we protected, rely on leveraging strong partnerships with producers and community partners, and really addressing and adapting the complex and long-term challenges that come with our work. And within this, there's essentially two key prongs to our stewardship program. One prong is our, let me get some pictures here. One prong is our perpetual obligation to uphold the conservation outcomes of our land protection projects. So that's really carrying out the promise we commit to when we protect a piece of property, ensuring that it remains farmland forever. And in that, we're obligated to, one, maintain strong relationships with landowners and farmers, two, to visit properties at least annually to monitor the terms of the easement, and three, address any issues that arise with those obligations. In doing this, we follow and evaluate our work according to the accreditation standards that are set for land trust by the Land Trust Alliance. And we see these as the core obligations to upholding our commitments to perpetual stewardship of the farmland we protect, which is intended to be permanent in nature. And yet we also recognize that farmers are called to innovate constantly as they navigate changing conditions around them. And as you might imagine, permanence and innovation don't necessarily go hand in hand. Given that what is best management for a property or farm operation today could look very different in the future, our stewardship program also includes a second prong that focuses on supporting and incentivizing a continual improvement of farmland management and practices. That's great. That's the right slide. Thanks, Gina. At Washington Farmland Trust, we believe wholeheartedly that farming can be a tool to rebuild soil, to keep water clean, to support biodiversity, and to promote climate resilience. We see these tenets as key to ensuring a healthy landscape and community. In the world of agriculture, there are many growing methods that promote these ecological benefits, from organic to no-till, regenerative to biodynamic, and other growing methods. And by focusing on the sustainability outcomes aligned with our mission, we aim to be creative and flexible in how we support farmers' efforts. Historically, our organization focused exclusively on protecting certified organic farms. However, just 2% of the nearly 40,000 farms in Washington state fit this definition today. In order to make the biggest impact on Washington's land and farmers, we developed our Healthy Farms framework to help ground our work in the key natural resources we seek to protect through our land conservation work, being again, soil, water, biodiversity, and climate resilience. In all of our work, we're seeking to tailor the services we provide to align with what the needs and priorities of local communities. And as with our conservation work, our stewardship goals are informed by local priorities and partnerships. Often several stakeholders are seeking to achieve multiple ecological benefits on a single piece of farm ground. Our stewardship program is how we achieve the long-term impact of those partnerships and investments. And both of these two program prongs that I described are really key to that strategy. At the Farmland Trust, we recognize that many ways that healthy farms support resilient communities. Communities with a diversity of farm operations help address a number of complex issues. The needs we face around climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. The scale of what is viable for agriculture economically is constantly changing, especially in this region in Central Puget Sound. And then long-term access to land is one of the biggest barriers to farmers in investing in and implementing sustainable farm practices. So with a portfolio of diverse farm operations, our work calls for having an adaptable approach to farmland stewardship and to land management. And I'll just wrap my piece by saying every property that we protect is unique. Every farmer's situation is unique. There's no one size fits all approach to stewarding land. And recognizing that need for adaptation inherent in land management, the Farmland Trust has leaned into operating in that complexity. And I'm really proud of the creative ways that our organization has evolved to respond to emergent needs to support farmers looking to improve their practices and to ensure that our land is cared for long into the future. And with that, I want to turn it over to our stewardship manager, Rusty Mulholland, who's here, and he's going to help us dig a bit deeper into what that looks like on the ground.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you all for your time tonight, for your interest and support in farmland stewardship. Again, my name is Rusty Mulholland. I'm the stewardship manager here at the Trust, where I've served this role for the last 5 years. When we conserve a farm, we are making a promise that that property will stay a farm into the future in the face of many unknowns and pressures. And stewardship is the day-to-day act of carrying out that promise. At Washington Farmland Trust, we deploy a variety of tools to conserve land, from relatively straightforward agricultural conservation easements to the outright purchase of threatened land through what we call our buy, protect, sell approach. The more innovative approaches to land protection present both unique challenges and also create unique opportunities. Farmers are natural collaborators in the stewardship of protected farmland. They build their life's work and livelihood on our region's soils and natural resources. As such, their experiences and perspectives from the field are invaluable. Our stewardship work goes beyond the required land trust responsibilities of monitoring and enforcement to ensure the health and viability of conserved farms over time through financial and technical support of sustainable practices and habitat stewardship. I'll talk more about those aspects of our work in a minute. But first, let me dig into a pair of examples that speak to the complexity of our ongoing obligations and to our stewardship approach. Pictured here is Paul and Daleen, the farmers of Olson Farm in Chehalis. We protected their 121-acre farm with an agricultural conservation easement last year in the summer of 2020. What you may not know is that we've been working with Paul and Daleen for over 7 years to make that success possible. And yet that was really only the beginning of our partnership with these dedicated land stewards. The farm has been in the Olson family through several generations and managed transitions with changing markets from dairy to organic dairy, then now to organic grass-fed beef. Their evolution is just one example of how farm businesses change over time. And we build the necessary flexibility into our conservation easements to allow for future agricultural viability. Though their beef operation is doing great these days, we're keenly aware that none of us know exactly what the future will bring. Through the conservation easement process, we partnered with the Olsons and the local branch of the Natural Resource Conservation Service to develop a farm plan that speaks to the ways in which their current operation protects natural resources and also further details opportunities for enhancements. Our perpetual relationship allows us to take the long view as we work to be a resource to Paul and Daleen over the coming years and whomever the future stewards may be. Moving on to another example, Washington Farmland Trust purchased the Harmon farm outright as part of one of our buy, protect, sell projects in 2015. When the previous owner was ready to retire and had no successor in place. Though this strategy requires more resources from financing to coordinating the multiple transactions involved, it also provides more opportunities for Washington Farmland Trust to ensure farm properties are set up for success in a future with a warming climate. In addition to permanently protecting the agricultural fields of the Harmon farm, we also work to transfer ownership of the riparian portion of the property to Pierce County to support their floodplain restoration work and their investments in habitat enhancements along the Carbon River. Last year, to support the future agricultural viability, we transitioned the farm's irrigation water source away from the small stream that had irrigated the property for decades to a new irrigation well, which is what you see here in the background, the well being drilled. Not only does this transfer provide more reliability of the water source for crop irrigation into the future, but it also improves flows for off-channel habitat for juvenile salmon and other species in Card Creek, which some of you may have actually helped us restore just upstream on a handful of our other conservation projects. Through this type of proactive approach to managing water rights is very complex. It's time intensive, it's expensive, but we see a real need for more of this type of work within our conservation portfolio to address the projections coming to our region in the near term with climate change. Hillary mentioned the intentional ways which Washington Farmland Trust seeks to go above and beyond in our stewardship work. A key effort of that I'm so proud of is our Advancing Farm Sustainability program, which helps farmers in their adoption of sustainable land management practices. As our climate rapidly changes, the health of our soil, water, and habitat will determine the future viability of farming, as well as the long-term impacts our own communities and families face. Through our Advancing Farm Sustainability program, we encourage farmers to adopt land management practices that support soil health, water resource protection, climate adaptation, and biodiversity by providing necessary financial and technical assistance. Our sustainability work is focused on 4 key tenets. Soil, which is the foundation of our farm economy, and maintaining soil health is key to long-term ag viability. Water is necessary for both the thriving agricultural systems, but also our ecosystems and local growing communities. Biodiversity and habitat. Although farmland is often a highly managed and human-altered system, it's deeply connected to the landscape that surrounds it. And climate resilience. Farms that sequester carbon, increase irrigation efficiencies, and limit petrochemical dependence can help mitigate the impacts of climate change. Rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all approach to sustainability, we trust farmers to determine what is best for their individual farm, and we work to support their efforts. Since its inception, Advancing Farm Sustainability has supported 22 projects, and we have 4 more in the works this year, each providing a unique benefit to Washington's farm system. One example of a recent project was one taken on by Helsing Junction Farm in Rochester, Washington. For the farmers of Helsing Junction, the impacts of climate change on water availability were made glaringly apparent in 2015. That was the year the farm in our region experienced one of the worst droughts in Western Washington in recent history. This experience propelled farmers Annie and Sue at the time to become better prepared and more adaptable to changing conditions and weather patterns that affect their farm. With funding from Advancing Farm Sustainability, Annie and Sue were able to update their irrigation system, allowing them to reduce their annual water consumption significantly and saving tens of millions of gallons of water. Recognizing that our conservation work does not occur in a vacuum, our stewardship team is constantly looking for opportunities to collaborate with the larger community through initiatives and planning efforts. In particular, we're always looking for chances to get the local community out onto working farms that often aren't generally open to the public. Since most of the productive farmland in Washington, particularly here in the western half of the state, is located within our river valleys and floodplains, there are frequent opportunities for habitat restoration that's compatible with and often will enhance the overall agricultural values. Working with many of our frequent partners, such as conservation districts, tribes, salmon recovery groups, and the farmers themselves, we leverage volunteer support and our Perpetual investment to assist in the implementation of these important restoration efforts. Who's this guy here? Over the past decade alone, we've partnered with 11 farms to support their habitat restoration goals. In my personal experience in this work, farmers are often interested in collaborating with local efforts and have a keen eye for the health of habitat areas adjacent to their fields. However, their busy schedules and the expenses involved can often limit their ability to engage in this type of initiative. At Washington Farmland Trust, we work to bridge this capacity gap by tracking the plans and initiatives of partners and helping to play the role of connector where opportunities may exist. Through this work, we have assisted with the restoration of over 7 acres of riparian and pollinator habitat, including the installation of nearly 4,000 native plants. Much like conservation projects, restoration work is often just beginning when the plant goes in the ground, and our perpetual relationship with these conserved farms makes us a natural partner in these regional efforts. Though our on-farm restoration volunteer opportunities have been on pause over the past year to the global pandemic, I look forward to seeing you all out into the field and getting your hands dirty over the coming years.
Thank you, Rusty and Hillary. For those of you on camera, can I see a raise of hands for who is excited about getting out on a farm this year? Anyone? Can we do 2 hands? Thank you. Yeah, it's just such a exciting thought to think that that might even be a possibility this year. It's just what a remarkable past 12 to 15 months. But as our stewardship team illustrated, once we conserve a farm, the work is far from over. And as we work for the next few years, we'll continue to integrate climate science and resilience into our stewardship planning processes. Later in the year, we look forward to sharing with all of you news of several more farmland conservation successes. We're still at this point where we're not yet sharing what they are, but it's a really exciting strategies that bring together our commitments to climate resilience and farmland conservation. And at present, we're on track to protect more farms in a single year than ever before, which given the past 12 to 15 months feels especially remarkable. And yeah, as our portfolio of protected farmland grows, so too does our stewardship obligation. And so what does that mean for the Farmland Trust in practical terms? It means we need to add staff capacity. We need more Rusties on our stewardship team. So we're actively working on recruiting and hiring new staff within that program. It also means we need to think about how we fund stewardship for the long term. And so our team's going to work hard this year on developing a model that helps us anticipate and fund what those longer term stewardship commitments are. And you can anticipate hearing more from us regarding the complexities of stewardship. Much like stewardship, this is just the beginning of our conversation with you all about stewardship, and there's a lot more exciting news and projects to come. And that's what we have for you. We really just kind of wanted to daylight our stewardship activities, talk a little bit about some examples, and then open it up for questions as you all might have them. So I encourage you to either just, turn on your camera and ask your question, or feel free to put it in the chat. And Gina here, Gina, if you can let me know if you're still able to moderate chat, otherwise I can do that.
I am able to. I see the chat as of when I had to leave and rejoin. So if anyone dropped any questions in earlier, I might have lost them. I had to rejoin my session.
All right. Well, Beth is out of the gates with one, and I'll let you take it from there, Gina.
Sorry, now there's the toddler bomb. Okay, sorry about that. Beth asks, who do you work with to understand climate adaptation planning on farms? Hillary or Weston, would you like to give that a shot?
I'll chime in. I think the short answer is everybody. There's luckily a lot of energy going into climate adaptation on farms, both on a kind of local and regional level. I think, the first partner that comes to mind is local conservation districts. They're often a really trusted partner to the farmers themselves, and are one of the most logical partners for farmers to work with in partnership with us on how their farm specifically and the specific resources they work with may adapt and change over time. And so an example in the local area is the Snohomish Conservation District, which has just gone through a really intensive agricultural resilience plan that we were a part of to help the Snohomish County farms plan for and adapt to climate change. But then on the statewide level, there's other programs, both the academic institutions and the agencies everyone's kind of trying to attack the challenge from a different angle. And so we're trying to keep track of and work with all of those efforts at different levels.
I'll just tag on one of the places that we've gotten a lot of good data to help inform our kind of landscape level planning, as well as just setting context regionally, is the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington. They have a great program that generates a lot of data that's really helpful. We've also done some work with some water rights consultants to help us understand water. Water really emerging as one of the key ways that ag is going to be impacted in Washington state with climate change. So we've worked with a water rights consultant to help flesh out some more detailed strategy about water and how we manage that and help inform our efforts going forward. With a couple of other examples too. Great question.
I have a question for Rusty. This is Jane Blackwell. You mentioned the Harmon farm, and I realized this was maybe a few years ago, not having anyone to succeed the retiring farmer. Is that now being operated by someone?
That's a great question. So with the buy, protect, sell strategy, part of why we stepped in with that property was because there wasn't an identified farmer into the future. And because that process, the process of conservation, getting the conservation easement funds, doing that riparian sale, even drilling the well, that takes many years. Here we are in 2021. And we just now have the irrigation well in place. We worked through that time with past tenants who had been leasing the property, and then finally last year put the property on the market with some local brokers to identify who the future farmer would be. So we're under contract now with one farmer who's interested in it, and hopefully we'll move towards closing and purchase the property by the end of this year. But it hasn't been 100% committed at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your question, Jane. Another from the chat. Ellie asks, as you add on projects, do you need to add on staff to maintain the relationships? Melissa, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, yeah. And fun fact, when I was hired by the trust 16 years ago, my first job was as the first stewardship FTE for the organization. So we've essentially been a team of 1.5 since about 2008. As we near up to about 3,000 acres and 25 farms, which we're at 2,600 acres and 25 farms right now, we are close, if not far surpass our needs to add additional capacity. So we are there. We will be adding one additional staff person. Hillary also supports our stewardship team. So I think that the two FTE approach for stewardship is fine now. That is one of the things we do have our eyes on when we look at a financial model though, and that is informed by number of acres. And it's just to say, it's about number of acres, but it's every acre, every farm has a relationship that accompanies it. And so it's not just about tending acres, it's about tending those relationships. And given that those relationships are pretty dynamic and involve an active business sort of as the cornerstone of the activity that happens on that property, we take that relationship building very seriously. And so paying attention to the organizational capacity that's needed, not just to monitor and uphold those terms of the easements, but also to do that really intentional relationship building is really top of mind for us. So that's in part how we'll think about staffing into the future, and kind of what successful stewardship looks like, is being able to be available and have relationships with our portfolio as it grows. So in the near term, one additional staff person, but I'm sure, down the road there will be more.
Thanks, Melissa. Dale asks, have you had to work against proposed development of farmland, or can you cite an example? Hillary, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, so we have had, we have had a few projects that were larger scale projects where the farmland was either slated for imminent development or had been slated for development recently and was still in a, like on the market listed and vulnerable. So one specific example I can share is the Mountain View Dairy project in Pierce County that we completed. And that piece of property was brought to our attention by both a farmer that was interested in it, as well as a broker that we know really well, who saw it listed on the market, saw the development, that plat that was planned for the property, and called it to our attention. At the time, we were nervous about wading into that because it's a 285 acre piece of property, and it was a larger scale transaction than we had done in the past. But that was at the time, our biggest Buy, Protect, Sell project that we took on, where we actually worked with some debt financing to step in and buy the property and get it off of the market in order to have some time to get public funding to line up to take the conservation easement on the property, ensure that it was protected and forever. And now we're working with a farmer to transition that property back into private ownership. So I don't know if that fully addresses your question, but that's one example of a property that was imminently slated for proposed development that we intervened on and turned it into a conservation project. Yeah.
Hillary, I'll keep you for another second, because this is kind of the other side of the coin. Connie asks, are there projects that you had to decline or ones that got away?
Gotcha. Yeah, we've definitely declined projects before. So we have what we call our project selection criteria that are basically the key characteristics that we're looking at when we assess a property that could be a conservation project for us. So that's looking at the soil quality on the property, the size of the property, the location of the property, the other conservation benefits of the property. So the habitat benefits, is there riparian area? Is there habitat for protected or threatened species, et cetera? And those whole suite of criteria we look at to assess if the project is a fit for not only our funding, our public funding, but also our conservation priorities. So we've definitely had projects come forward that weren't a good fit with that for any number of reasons. One of the big reasons that a project might not move forward, if it was a piece of farmland that it was open space farmland had been used, but the soil quality turned out to be not productive, that would be one reason that we might decline a project. There might be other reasons we might decline a project. There might be a piece of property that water was really key to future viability of that piece of farmland, and there was no water available anymore, that kind of thing. So it depends a lot on the individual property, but we have had to decline projects that didn't match our criteria in the past.
I'll chime in quickly to add a little bit to that too. In terms of ones that got away, there certainly are a couple of projects that we can probably think of that, were a conservation opportunity that, fell apart for one reason or another. But at least on the stewardship side of things, when we've conserved a property, I often find myself in what feels like many years and possibly decades long conversations that may just take a lot of time to percolate. And so, one example of that, the Delta Farm, which was our first conservation easement project, back in 2003, we did a sale with, worked with the county and Washington Fish and Wildlife on the sale of a portion of the riparian area to help facilitate some floodplain restoration work there. That project is now hopefully going to break ground this summer. And we've been engaged over the last 17 years through probably 7 or 8 different staff members at the Trust. So one of the beauties and the curse of stewardship is that often the work goes on forever and we're in it for the long haul. And I think that sometimes helps me, at least, in kind of reducing some of the urgency of the pressure. If that project, that riparian enhancement isn't going in this year, or someone, can't make sense of cover crops on a particular field this year, there's always next year. And we have that relationship in perpetuity, and we kind of work on that long time horizon.
Thanks for that extra context, Rusty. This might be for you or for Hillary, but Ellie asked about when we transfer riparian areas, as we did on Harmon to the county. How do we know what comes of that into the future?
I'm happy to take that one. So for most of our conservation projects where we are transferring a portion of the habitat acreage to another entity, we're always working with an entity that's more set up for habitat stewardship than we are. Though we like to support stewardship efforts, and particularly these habitat restoration efforts, we have a stewardship team of essentially 1.5 and a relatively modest budget to support this work. And salmon recovery work especially, but habitat stewardship just generally requires a lot of time and effort and funding. And so there's a variety of different partners that are actively working towards restoring our habitat in this region. And so when we are working to dispose of a piece of property that has that high habitat value, we work closely to figure out who is doing that work in that particular geography that can carry that forward. So for the Harmon farm, as an example, the county is most of the way through the planning stages of a levee setback, where they're going to pull a man-made levee further away from the river to allow for more natural floodplain processes, and also enhance the habitat that's there. And though there is a possibility that that levee setback project wouldn't happen or might take another 2 decades to really come to fruition, the county is more set up to have more resources to do that habitat stewardship on that portion of the property than we would be over the long term.
Thanks, Rusty. Hillary, Dale asked about if we are working in Sammamish Valley farmland preservation.
Great question. So we have not done any projects in the Sammamish Valley, but King County is a close partner to us, particularly in the land that the county has already protected through their farmland protection program. So they've conserved through conservation easement a significant amount of the different ag production districts in King County, including the Sammamish ag production district. But that being said, one way that we have not worked in the Sammamish in particular yet, but one of the ways in which our other programs might be engaged in that area, we have a farm to farmer program that's about helping farmers that are seeking land access land opportunities. And we're looking at how we expand that geographically right now. So we in King County, we have the Working Farmland Partnership, which is a partner, which our farm to farmer program is involved in. And Melissa, I don't know if you want to add anything specific about that, but that is a partnership with King County, King Conservation District, our organization, the Farm to Farmer program, and some other partners that is looking countywide at farmland access priorities. And Melissa, I don't know if you have anything specific about
Sure.
Sammamish to add to that, but that's
Yeah, I can chime in. So, as Hillary was saying, King County has done a tremendous job since the 70s of protecting basically those valley bottom soils throughout the county, and the Sammamish being of that set of criteria of valley bottom soils that are really important agricultural areas in King County. So the county takes the lead. We have protected land in King County, but we often, the county will call us and say, hey, this isn't the right fit for us. Can you step in? But we haven't been as focused on King County, in part because Snohomish and Pierce County keep us so busy. That being said, as Hillary was saying, our farm to farmer program is quite active in King County. We lead the Working Farmland Partnership, and that's really the sort of next phase of land conservation. So once the land is conserved, it needs to be in farmland production. And unfortunately, here in King County, the land prices here are so high that finding strategies to allow and to enable farmers to access that farmland here in King County requires kind of a constellation of actors. So the Working Farmland Partnership is truly a partnership of many sort of agricultural, food-based, land-based organizations here in King County that come together on a specific strategy to really, we do that by really case management approach, where we take farmers who want to get their land back into production, or say someone who has land that wants to get it back into production. They approach the Working Farmland Partnership group and say, hey, I have this particular challenge. Can you help me problem solve it? We create a kind of case management, we call them project groups, to really help troubleshoot what that issue and that barrier is to getting that land back in production. If there's an issue of a landowner wanting to find a tenant for that property, that's where Farm to Farmer comes in. We can help list that property. If you aren't familiar with Farm to Farmer, you can go to farmtofarmer.org and see the list of properties we have available all the way up from Skagit County down south to Pierce County. That being said, it's a partnership approach here in King County, and we know the need for that program is across the state. And so that's one of the other things we're doing here, as informed by our work here in King County in a partnership model, is to think about how we expand that program across the state. Right now, we've heard from 15 other counties who want to bring that program and that partnership model to their geographies. And our organization, we don't want to do it alone, and we can't do it alone. So we're looking at a partnership model to expand on that work that's happening here in King County and bring that across the state. And if you're really curious about Farm to Farmer, we talked all about our Farm to Farmer program with our King County coordinator in our March session. So again, another shameless plug for that March session. You can check it out on YouTube.
Thanks, Melissa. I have a pair of questions I'll put together, maybe for you, Rusty. One came directly to me, asked how we are able to fund the projects. Sorry, in the back. Like the well drilling that we did on Harmon, or the micro grant program, AFS, and then paired also with what's available to farmers to fund their climate change work, grants or direct funding, all things funding.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Just looking at your question, Sarah, here, how do farmers fund the needed changes for climate change? When I talk to farmers, I think the bottom line that they always think of is, they think of sustainability through the lens of not only the resources involved, but also their business and their financial sustainability. So kind of first and foremost, for most folks, they need to make sense of how is this, what is my vulnerability here with climate change? And then how is this investment going to protect against that, essentially? And so for many farmers, they may be able to look at that picture holistically and make sense of getting a loan to take on a project, or otherwise allocating, a portion of their budget within their business to tackling a particular project. But for some projects, they just might not pencil for the business. And so that's where our Advancing Farm Sustainability program comes in. That's one small grant funding source that's available to folks. But they also often work with cost share districts, with cost share programs from conservation districts, with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is a branch of the federal USDA. There's funding that can be available to farmers through that. but generally, that's kind of the big piece that I think most farmers consider when they're thinking about climate vulnerabilities, and then also the steps they need to take in adaptation, is just the financial sustainability of that change. And then just speaking to the Harmon well drilling project as kind of a good example of that. That project, we were lucky that, because we were working within this partnership model and within this particular reach of the river where the county was interested in doing this floodplain restoration and enhancement project, we were able to fund the drilling of that well as part of our sale of that riparian part of the property. But that was a really unique opportunity for us, and that's not always available. And so, it's kind of one of those projects that from both a farmer perspective and a resource provider or agency perspective, it's a no-brainer that, the farm can benefit from the well. The stream is benefiting from not having the pump right in the stream and instead pulling it from the groundwater, even though it's essentially the same amount of water. It has less direct impact to the fish in the stream. And so it's kind of one of those no-brainers, but it takes a technical service provider years to work through that process. And even for us, thousands of dollars in consultant costs, hard costs, soft costs. So it's a complicated thing to take on. And for a lot of farmers, it's hard to dedicate the time and resources to that. So, our wheels are spinning. I think there's much more of this work that needs to get done. And, the philanthropic support to our organization helps us take on some of those projects. But we're also trying to figure out how to broaden our impact. I don't know if hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Rusty. Well, I think we've made our way through the questions in the chat, but I did want to give folks a moment in case they want to chime in with any final thoughts, or if anything that Hillary or Melissa or Rusty shared brought up additional questions. All right.
No shortage of need.
Very true.
Certainly, no shortage of need and no shortage of work.
Nice to see you, Monty.
Hi, Monty. Yeah, I just wanted to echo our thanks to all of you for joining us this evening, asking such great questions, and for your patience as we navigated technical issues, which seem to be pervasive throughout our team. So I suspect maybe we can blame Microsoft on this one, but we really appreciate your patience and your curiosity about this work, and invite you to reach out if you have any more questions, and hope to see you all out on a farm at some point in 2021.
Right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Melissa, will you end the recording?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.